This is John Gilroy from the Federal Tech Podcast.
And this is Jeff Gallimore from Excella.
Today we're going to talk about security with software development. Hit the music, Claude.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator. Our guest today is Jeff Gallimore, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at Excella. We're going to talk about security and software development. But first, I have to tell you, we're recording this from Monk's Barbecue in lovely downtown Purcellville. And after this interview, Jeff's going to waltz over and get some barbecue. So what are you going to order today?
Well, they have something at the top of the menu that is my favorite. It's called the Boss Hog.
Oh, but, the Boss Hog.
Yeah, the Boss Hog is basically every smoked meat that they have, and there will be leftovers involved. So it'll be wonderful.
It's going to be a good afternoon. Okay, let's get serious here. I love to start off with quotes because I love quoting smart people. One of the smartest people I know is a guy named retired Brigadier General Greg Toohill. He's running CERT now in Pittsburgh. And he famously said that security must be top of mind throughout an application's development. So, agree, disagree from a federal perspective? I mean, that's obvious, but how do you incorporate it in large projects?
Yeah. You can't argue with the general. Security does have to be top of mind. The problem comes in is when you realize all of the other things that have to be top of mind too. Meeting the mission need, getting the work done, operational stability, reliability, quality. Oh, and security too. There are lots of considerations for teams to have top of mind to be able to do the job well.
So maybe it's a matter of priority. You can Google this and find this. I did the research this morning. This year, 2023, federal agencies have $11 billion to spend on cybersecurity. So how do you prioritize that expenditure? Is it worry about zero trust? Is it worry about software bill of materials? Is it worry about open source software? So where do you prioritize?
Yeah, I think it's for sure about prioritization. I mean, yes, we have to make hard choices about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do and what we're going to buy and what we're not going to buy. But over the last probably 7 or 8 years, I've also realized that maybe there are some both-and choices to get to. And a lot of roads lead back to DevOps for me, or DevOps, DevSecOps. And one of the things that the DevOps movement taught us was that you don't have to trade off throughput and stability. So you can get both of those things by implementing certain practices and having certain capabilities. Well, I think the same thing is true for security, too. So wouldn't it be great if we could get work done, we could get fast, frequent changes, we could have operational reliability and stability with our systems, and those systems could be secure. And I think that the evidence and the practice and the research and the stories and even our own experience bears that out, that you can't have all three of those things all together. There aren't any trade-offs involved.
So is the short phrase shift left, is that what we're talking about here, to incorporate security in the early stages of development?
Yeah, so exactly. Shift left is a phrase or a term that's been thrown out recently, and that is a key strategy for being able to improve our security outcomes without having to make those, at least as many of those hard trade-offs. So let's talk about what shift left really looks like. Well, first let's talk about left of what. And the traditional view of security or quality or testing or a lot of these things is that it happened at the right side of whatever that schedule, Gantt chart, diagram, workflow, process look like. You gather your requirements, you build the system, you do all the things, and then right before the system went to production or is deployed to production, the security group would come in. They do all their scans on all the software and tell you all the things that needed to be fixed before you actually went to production. Well, so we're talking about shifting left from that and integrating security concerns and perspectives and requirements as early in the process as we possibly can. That's in the architecture, that's the code, that's the components that we're using. And the behavior that's different is the teams and the programs who are building these systems, like, hey, reach out to your security counterparts. Get them involved when in the planning of this, whatever it is that you're going to do. Get them involved in the architecture of whatever it is that you're going to do. Get them involved in the technologies that you're going to be choosing. And keep them involved throughout the whole process for whatever the life of that system is.
Every now and then I get to use fancy words because my wife's a Latin teacher. And so she once told me about this phrase called nomenclatura. Nomenclature. So I got to dive into nomenclatura here.
All right.
So there's a debate in the community about DevOps versus DevSecOps. It's kind of like, I guess, Red Sox, Boston fans and Yankees fans. They hate each other. So is this a topic? Or I guess what part of the divide do you stand on?
What part of the divide? I am on the side of the divide that helps organizations win and people find joy in their work. And if that means standing on the DevOps side, okay. If that means standing on the DevSecOps side, okay. I try not to get too wrapped up around terms and terminology and try to look at the outcomes that we're trying to get here. And if the outcome is, hey, I want to be able to deliver better, higher quality software more frequently with higher stability, and I wanted people more engaged in their work, and I want to make sure that bad stuff doesn't happen. Like, I think we can all probably get behind that, regardless of whether we call it DevOps or DevSecOps or Fluffy Pink Bunny number 4.
Well, we're recording this from a barbecue place, so I got to talk about cooking. And so, if I were to bake a cake, and I was to bake cake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, or bake the cake at 130 degrees Celsius. Cake it's going to taste good no matter what. You can call it Celsius or Fahrenheit. We'd have that outcome, and the outcome is a good tasting cake or good tasting barbecue here, huh?
Right. That's right. It's about the outcomes, and I find way too often that people get wrapped around the axle on drawing bright lines around terminology and the this versus that, and sometimes we lose sight of the why behind a lot of these things. And the faster and more focused and clearer we can be on the why, I think things tend to work out a lot better.
Many of my listeners are involved in very, very large, complex projects, and they're using the hybrid cloud. And we know that there's a dearth of people actually working in some of these projects, can't hire people. So people are talking about automation. So what do you view the role of automation is in software development, maybe looking for vulnerabilities in code?
Yeah. Automation plays a huge role in being able to improve security or security outcomes. And so going back to that shift security left framing, in the typical way, traditional way, what would often happen is teams would build whatever the system is, and then they'd sort of effectively pitch it over the wall to the security group who would run their scans. They take that magical security tooling and they'd run it against the software that's been built, and they'd look for vulnerabilities. And again, that was happening really, really late in the process, and it was also really manually intensive. To being on the other side of the pitching over the wall, those security teams were inundated with, I got to run scans on all of the things because there's all of these teams that are trying to make changes, and we got to make sure that we're not introducing risk, or at least mitigating the risk of the enterprise. And so that would take a really long time, and the teams would be blocked from going into production. Well, what if we turn that dynamic around and just as a start, take those same tools that the security group is using and bake that in so that the teams who are building the software could actually use the same tools with the same rules to run those security scans in a similar way that the security group is doing. And that's a start of that automation story of how we can get the throughput and the stability and the security all at the same time. We're all using the same tools, and we're using that automation to be able to do things that automation is really good at, which is run things really fast, really consistently, and give us the feedback that everything's okay or that there's things that we need to fix. And so baking those security tools into, here's one of my favorite terms, the CI/CD pipeline.
Ooh, this is very good
terminology.
Nomenclature.
Yeah, so baking those security tools in, so we're looking for code vulnerabilities, we're looking for vulnerabilities in the packages or the components that we're, the third-party components that we're using to build our systems. And we're making all of those checks to make sure that we haven't opened up any holes or done anything that might leave us open to badness.
So, see, I think in the spy movies they're like informants or something, but we're not talking about citizen informants here. We're talking about continuous integration.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And having those tools consistently run, repetitively run, frequently run, like multiple times a day, every check-in, that's the thing that's going to keep us safer than we were before anyway.
Okay, so let's say we have this perfect world. You're sitting downtown with a CIO of an agency, and you say, ABC, we should do it this way. And he goes, well, yeah. And then another person on the team goes, yeah. And you all agree, and it's a perfect situation. And then you're into the buzzsaw, and the buzzsaw is acquisition.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times with people in acquisition, they may not be trained on some of these types of continuous development, continuous integration, and they may want to put it into a certain checkbox where something happens at one time, and what would Ron Popeil say? Set it and forget it.
Yeah, right.
And so where does acquisition, should acquisition learn more about this flexible software acquisition and continuous improvement, or where do they fit in this talk?
Yeah, acquisition plays such an important role, not only in the security, but really, quite honestly, for the federal agencies to meet their mission and to get the goods and services that they need to do that. And that set it and forget it philosophy, just to offer an opinion, I don't think it works anymore. Not in this world of constantly changing stuff. Let alone technology. Technology is changing at such a fast pace. I don't know how you write a contract with a particular requirement and not expect that requirement is going to change at some point in the very, very near future. So to the degree that we can incorporate change into our contracts and value the importance of that change in our contracts, that is the role of acquisition, is to be able to continuously change to be able to meet the evolving needs of whatever the customer needs.
I have interviewed many companies, and when we talk about software, the concept of open source always comes up, and more people tell me is that most software today is really a developer grabs some code off the shelf or from a library and plugs it in here, plugs it in there, and the role of open source is increasingly important in a lot of federal organizations. And so what role does open source and software libraries have in making sure this software is solid and it can actually be continuously improved?
Right. This is an area that a lot of modern enterprises are really looking at, because they've had that realization that you just shared, which is more so today than ever, software is to a large degree being composed rather than created. So we're pulling all of these third-party libraries and services and components, as you put it, off the shelf. Hopefully it's an approved shelf that's a vetted shelf with stuff on there, but how do we trust that those software components are good for our business or our mission? And there's a lot of organizations now that are spending a lot of time trying to understand what here's another term for you, software supply chain looks like, and making sure that it is a trusted software supply chain, that we're not inadvertently or accidentally incorporating vulnerabilities into our enterprise. And it's a really complex problem, and it's an evolving area. If you want to look back to the executive order that came out not quite 2 years ago, so May of 2021, it was a lot about that. It was a lot about being able to manage the software supply chain for the federal government in a more intentional way, and hopefully that promotes better security outcomes.
I introduced Jeff earlier. He is the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at Excella. If you want more information, you go to the website, EXCELLA. And if you really want a treat, follow Jeff on LinkedIn. Gallimore. Every day he comes up with, I don't know how he comes up, he must get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and compose these things, because he'll take an aspect of software development and dive right into it. He'll dive into training. He'll dive into continuous improvement. And it's almost like a thought of the day or something. I'm wondering, he should assemble those into a book or something, because you really put some thought in these LinkedIn updates, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yes, I know. You can tell.
Sometimes, it's like 10 o'clock at night, and I'm still thinking, like scratching my head. It's like, what am I going to come up with? What am I going to write? Most of it at this point is just about the habit of being in writing and being able to express thoughts clearly.
I'm thinking about the person who manages Monks over here. I mean, they have management challenges. They have changes all the time, and they have certain supplier difficulties. So I think some of the things you're right about apply to the people who are at Monks here, people down the street. I mean, so many different areas. It's almost a beyond software. Nothing with software. It's about managing what? We can manage barbecue, you can manage ribs, or you can manage software development, I guess.
I also think that on that same point, I think there are a lot of things that the software and the technology industry can learn from other industries. I mean, touching on that SBOM concept or software bill of materials, like it didn't start out software bill of materials. It started out bill of materials, the physical world of building stuff. The ingredient list or the component list of what's the stuff that's in this thing. And we applied that concept to software. And there's a lot of examples like that.
You mentioned about Compose, and in one of your LinkedIn updates, you talked about going down to the Kennedy Center. My wife and I have been to the Kennedy Center. It's a great place. And you used the word compose, and I thought of orchestrate. We have composing, we have orchestrating. And one thing I noticed at the Kennedy Center is that when that orchestra played, that piano didn't move. That piano stayed in the same place. When you orchestrate things, this piano could be moving, could be going upside, could be contracting outside and bringing stuff in. So orchestration is a lot more complicated when it comes to software development than just a plain old symphony.
Yeah, that's right. The rules of change in the software world are kind of different than the rules of change in the physical world, at least in terms of cost and friction associated with that. This is probably a whole other discussion, but that's where we got the Agile Manifesto from, is realizing that the world of software was very different than the world of building buildings and submarines and things like that.
I got to put on your historian. There are people who are listening to this who may not know what that reference is. It was about 15, 18 years ago.
22 at this point.
Met in a mountaintop. Bunch of developers, and they said, we got a lot of troubles here. And one of the main troubles, by the way, was airline problems back then. And they figured, how can we solve it? And they came up with some principles, and they called it the Agile Manifesto, which has really had repercussions even till today. Yeah.
It's a set of principles and values, all intended to discover new and better ways of building software. And I think they're still just as applicable today, maybe even more so, than they were 20-something years ago. We still follow them.
Let's talk about orchestration and composing things. If you look at the different tools that are out there, and I've done 1,000 podcast interviews. I've dealt with people with platforms, with tools, people with scanners, all kinds of things. And there are a lot of great project management tools out there. There are a lot of great code repositories. There are a lot of great XYZs out there. But the problem is going down to the Kennedy Center and orchestrate. I mean, okay, Jeff, you got to put this all together. You got a diesel motor, and you got a plow tire, and then you got a barbecue pit. So make a barbecue pedal. I mean, it's hard to do, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, it is. There's no shortage of tools out there, and unfortunately, I think that's where a lot of people gravitate to most first is, well, I just need a new tool for this. There's a new requirement out there, and let's just go out and find the tool that's gonna meet the need. And they inject yet another tool into their environment, and a lot of times those decisions can be counterproductive because you neglect the maintenance of those things, you neglect the training, appropriate use. Is it actually giving us the value that we thought we were going to be getting from the tool? And when encountering those situations, there are a few things that I'm clear about that I've learned in my career. And generally speaking, the place that I want to start and that I advise others to start is you start with the people first. You get the right group of people together with the right skills, expertise, perspective, and motivation. You're going to solve most of the problems just with that. Then you can work on supporting them with the right process and the right policies and putting those in place. And then, once you get that figured out, then you can use bring the technology to bear on making those things faster, more efficient, more effective. But start with the people first. And if you are going to inject a new technology, and there are great ones out there, and there are many of them that we should all be using, but start with the people first.
Let's talk about people in downtown Percival here. 2 blocks from here, there's a mechanic named Mike Bridges Automotive. And I'm sure if you went into his shop, you'd see a certain limited number of tools. He doesn't, run into a problem and buy another tool, maybe occasionally, but he optimizes the tools that he has now.
Right.
And I think maybe this get another tool, I mean, I'm sure that if you did a survey of, let's say, a federal agency, you might find some tools that aren't ever being used.
That's right.
And so Mike's got a small shop here. He's got to use every 9/16 wrench that he has. He can't have 3 or 4 different kinds there.
Yeah.
And so I think the discipline to use a correct tool, or may not think that one tool's got the answer to something, and the idea of maybe humans can integrate with these tools a little bit better. There's a shout out to Mike Bridges. He's my mechanic.
Yeah.
I've been reading up on DevOps and DevSecOps and everything, and there's a company called GitLab. It's the middle of this game, and they do surveys. They did a survey in August of 2023, and they said security is the driving force behind DevOps. Yeah. Security's all of a sudden going to priorities. It's going to the top of the priority instead of efficiently doing it's at the top. And security wasn't mentioned in that mountaintop 22 years ago, was it? It was there, but it was implied.
Certainly not in the same way.
Yeah.
And there's only one word that I think I would take exception with that statement. Security is the driving force behind DevOps. I think I would say security is a driving force behind DevOps.
Let's parse some words here.
Yeah. So we all know that we want better security outcomes. We want them more efficiently. We want them more effectively. We want them for lower cost. We want all of those things. And we also want the work to get done, and we also want operational stability. And if security is the top priority, well, then let's see what happens when your systems start going down because you've invested all of your money in one thing over another, and you haven't invested in other areas. So I think every organization is different, and every context for every organization is different, and their priorities and needs are different. And rather than talking about a one-size-fits-all and security is the most important thing or something else is the most important thing in all circumstances, I think for each organization and maybe even each team, they need to find the right balance or the right integration of all of the things that are important.
I teach at a fancy pants school, so I get to quote philosophers. And so I'm going to quote a famous philosopher, and I want your observations, Jeff. So I'm going to quote the famous philosopher Yogi Berra. He said, "The future ain't what it used to be." So when we look into the future of this complex environment, hybrid cloud, compliance, regulations, constant attacks, where do you see this heading in the next few years?
Yeah. The future's going to be fun, John. The future's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun with me, I tell you that much.
Here's what I think is fun about it. First thing, at least that I believe about the future, things certainly aren't getting any less complex. They're getting more complex. That's the trend. And maybe they were always that complex, and we're now just kind of figuring that out. But things are getting more complex, and so we have to be able to respond to that or accommodate that or operate successfully in that sort of environment. I think that's thing number one. Thing number two is things are speeding up, and it certainly feels like that. A lot of people would say that. It's been speeding up for, I don't know, ever. It's certainly in the technology world. The pace of change is just accelerating, and when you've got speed with complexity, that starts to be, difficult, challenging to manage. And so the last realization is understanding that complexity is increasing and the pace of change is increasing. What does that really say that we need to be putting in place? And that's the capacity or the capability to respond constructively to change. And that's at the organizational level. Do we, as an organization, a group of people that are aligned to a common mission, do we have the ability to constructively respond to the changes inside and outside of our organization? Do we as human beings, individuals, have the ability to be able to respond to changes in our own environment constructively and grow and develop? That's growth mindset. And then from a technology perspective, are we bringing the practices and the capabilities into our organization to manage and implement and use and operate technology that is going to allow us to respond to changes in a constructive way? Because it's an inevitability. We know that something's going to change. When that happens, how are we going to be best positioned to respond to it?
Well, that's great information. And I think you may want to make a shameless plug for a book. I mean, I'm a big fan of, you want to tell the listeners here what book you want to...
One of the things
shameless plug number one from Jeff Gallimore.
John, I'm going to be leaving this with you because I brought this for you.
I have it. Smarten me up.
Yeah. No. So this book is called Investments Unlimited. It's from IT Revolution. So if anybody out there has read the Phoenix Project or the Unicorn Project or the DevOps Handbook or the book Accelerate, I'm huge fans of all of those books. This is sort of like the next in the series. And it's written as a novel, just like the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project were. And by the way, if you haven't read those books, you really should. If you've read The Goal, maybe I can expand the reach of people who can relate to this book. If you've read The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, again, novel format. And I think that it's the subtitle of this book that really says it all for me. It's a novel about DevOps, security, audit compliance, and thriving in the digital age. So it's a narrative about how modern organizations can incorporate all of those concepts, DevOps, security, audit compliance, in a way that looks different than it used to in the past, in that traditional human review, very document-heavy kind of way of working, into something that's efficient, it's effective, it actually produces joy in the people who are doing this, and it helps the organization win. So this is the book about that. It's a narrative, it's a story, it's an engaging read. You'll love it.
You've been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Jeff Gallimore, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at Excella, and we're signing off from Monk's Barbecue in lovely downtown Purcellville, Virginia.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.